The day I crossed paths with Calvin Hayes again, I watched a girl get thrown out of his mansion, a total mess. I asked the person next to me, "What's going on?" "Mr. Calvin is looking for the ex-wife who took care of him when he was blind. These are all imposters trying their luck. You get used to it." I lowered my eyes and murmured, "Oh." Soon, it was my turn. Calvin stared at my face. "You're from the same hometown as my ex-wife, and your names are almost the same. Do you know her?" I shook my head and lied with a straight face. "No." 2 years after I divorced Calvin Hayes, we ran into each other again. I had come to his residence as his new therapist. Before I even got to the door, I saw a girl being shoved outside, completely humiliated. "Get out. And don't ever let me see you again." A man's deep, furious roar came from inside. Calvin's assistant didn't bat an eye. "This happens a few times a month. You'll get used to it." "What are they doing?" "Oh, pretending to be Mr. Calvin's ex-wife." "What?" My surprise must have been obvious, because the assistant patiently explained. "It's no secret. When Mr. Calvin was blind, he married a woman. Now he's dead set on finding her." "Has he found her?" "Of course not. Instead, he just throws a few temper tantrums every month. You know how it is, too many people are after his money, so we get a lot of fakes showing up at the door." I followed the assistant silently. The villa was huge and felt cold. The assistant lowered his voice. "Mr. Calvin has a terrible temper. You'll need to be patient with him. That's why we're paying you so much." "What exactly is my job?" "To get Mr. Calvin to give up on his obsession and accept the marriage his family has arranged for him." As we spoke, we reached the master bedroom door. The assistant knocked, his voice suddenly sycophantic. "Mr. Calvin, the new therapist is here. Get out, all of you." "Sir, please calm down. Just talk to the therapist for a bit, maybe." Before he could finish, we heard the sound of a vase smashing against the door from inside. No doubt about it, if that door had been open, the vase would have shattered on the assistant's head. He broke out in a cold sweat. "Oh, okay, then. I'll just show Dr. Lowe out." The moment he said that, the bedroom door swung open. A tall, thin man stood before us, his expression dark and menacing. "What did you say her name was?" "Lily Lowe. It's spelled Lily, not Lia, like your ex-wife's." "It's a different name." The assistant scrambled to explain. "I also took out my work ID with my name on it. Do those old geezers in my family think I'll just obey them if they find a therapist with a similar name?" Calvin let out a cold laugh. "Dr. Lowe, you're fired." I'd heard the client was difficult. I just hadn't expected this difficult. But it gave me a perfect excuse to leave. I obediently gathered my things, ready to go. But then my ID card fell on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, but Calvin's hand got there first. "Your hometown is Seabrook?" He suddenly frowned. "Yes. I lived there 2 years ago. I even got married." "Do you know my wife, Leah?" "No." I told the lie without a flicker of hesitation. Thank God my previous name wasn't listed on my ID. Otherwise, Calvin would have realized I was Leah. 2 years ago, he had washed up on the beach, unconscious, and I was the one who found him. I was the one who made passionate love to him every night. And I was the one who tricked him into marrying me. But it was just a symbolic marriage. We never got a license. Calvin had lost his ID in the boating accident. Just like he'd lost his sight. The sudden darkness had made him lose his will to live. I stayed by his side, learning Braille with him. Only then did he visibly start to cheer up. I asked him about his family. "Aren't you going to go home? To your own family?" He shook his head. "Like this? I'd just be a laughingstock." I didn't ask what his family situation was, or what happened in the accident. He was carrying a heavy burden, and I didn't push. I just said, who would dare laugh at you? I've got nothing to lose. I'd go after them. Calvin let out a low chuckle. He touched my chin and suddenly kissed me. Most of the time, he was very quiet. He'd just sit by himself, lost in thought. But in bed, he was as fierce as a wild animal. The old bed would creak and groan. I often worried it would just fall apart one day. Unfortunately, we never made it to that day. We went our separate ways. Back in the present, I felt a little dazed. The good news was, I still had the high-paying job. The bad news was, I'd now be working right under Calvin's nose. When my friend recommended this job, she'd kept the client's identity completely confidential. I knew most rich people were like that. They didn't want anyone to know they had psychological issues. So the confidentiality agreements were ironclad before I even signed the contract. The huge salary had clouded my judgment. I never imagined the patient would be Calvin. And that his sight had returned. Calvin was still fuming. No one can stay calm after that many disappointments. While he was on the phone yelling at someone, the assistant whispered in my ear, "Why did you say you didn't know her? Couldn't you have just lied to him?" How? Just say Leah's dead. Then he'd finally move on, right? Are you sure he'd move on, and not have us buried instead? It was hard to argue with that. But then the assistant's eyes lit up, as if he'd spotted a lifeline. "Ms. Gong is here. We're saved." I looked up to see Serena Gong striding toward us. What happened? Another fake ex-wife showed up. "Mr. Calvin is not happy." "I know. I'll talk to him." She walked into the room like she owned the place and closed the door. A little while later, Calvin really did stop fuming. We could even hear the sound of calm conversation from inside. The assistant sighed in relief. "See? Only Ms. Gong can handle him." I asked, confused, "Then what do you need a therapist for?" "She's the heiress to the Gong Corporation, not a professional." It dawned on me. She's the one Calvin is supposed to marry? The assistant had already filled me in. The Hayes and Gong families were close. The person the Hayes family wanted Calvin to marry was Serena Gong. And conveniently, Serena felt the same way. "You know Mr. Calvin disappeared for a while 2 years ago, right?" The assistant dished out the gossip. "They finally found him, but he was blind, supposedly from a head injury. But the Hayes family is loaded, so they took him abroad for treatment, and Ms. Gong stuck by his side the whole time. If you ask me, Mr. Calvin isn't uninterested in her either. Otherwise, why would she be the only one he listens to? If it weren't for that ex-wife, they'd have been married by now." I nodded in agreement. Just then, the door opened. Serena walked out, looking poised. "And who is this?" she asked, looking at me. "She's the new therapist." "I see. Well, thank you for your hard work." Serena was about to leave when she paused and looked back at me. "Have we met somewhere before?" Of course we had. 2 years ago, when Calvin's family found him and were taking him abroad to treat his eyes. I had waited for him. I thought, he'll definitely come back once he's better. Once he could use a phone again, he'd definitely contact me. But I waited, and instead of Calvin, I got Serena. The moment she stepped into my house, she frowned and looked around. "Oh my God, people actually live here? My dog wouldn't even stay in a place like this." "Who are you?" I watched her warily. "I'm Calvin Hayes' fiancé." I was stunned. He said he'd never been in a relationship. He was blind. He felt he wasn't good enough for me, that's why he wouldn't admit it. Let him come and explain it himself. Don't be ridiculous. Serena looked at me with pity. He's the heir to an investment group. He has enough money to buy your entire village and turn it into a beach resort. You didn't really think he'd still need you after he got his sight back, did you? Take a look at the clothes you're wearing. She wasn't lying. I looked up the investment group online. It was definitely not something a person like me could ever dream of being a part of. Serena added, I hope you have some decency and stop bothering Calvin and me in the future. I believed her. Because when I was looking up the information, I saw the news about their families planning a strategic marriage. I changed my phone number and my name, disappearing completely from Calvin's life. Only today did I learn the truth. The families were just planning the marriage. Calvin had never agreed. There was no engagement, and fiancé was a total lie. But it didn't matter anymore. I saw the chasm between us. With or without Serena, we could never be together. Back in the present. It was normal that Serena didn't remember me. We had only met that one time. Luckily, she'd been so busy criticizing my home and my clothes that she hadn't paid much attention to my face. That's why I could calmly answer, I just have one of those faces. Serena nodded. You do. She didn't press the issue and left. Later, I fished for more information from the assistant. For example, whether Calvin had ever gone back to Seabrook to look for clues. The assistant said, he did, but there's almost no one left in that town, just a few old folks with thick accents. I breathed a sigh of relief. Seabrook used to be a fishing village. Later, everyone moved to the nearby town to get into the tourism business. The village became more and more deserted. Very few people had ever seen me and Calvin together. I started my work. Every day, I'd lower my voice and try to counsel Calvin. He was not cooperative. He would just watch me in silence, his expression dark and grim. It felt like a one-woman show. Until today. I knocked on Calvin's door as usual. I was prepared for another day of zero progress. But for the first time, Calvin spoke. The third year. What? 3 years ago today, my wife saved me on the beach. Mr. Calvin, you should look forward. Besides, you never got a marriage license. Strictly speaking, you weren't really married. Calvin was silent. I was used to it and bent my head to write my session notes. A long moment later, I realized Calvin had walked over and was standing right in front of me. He was squinting, studying me. My heart skipped a beat. Then I heard him ask, how did you know we didn't get a license? I don't think I ever told you that. Oh, crap. I'd let my guard down and made a mistake. I forced myself to stay calm. The person who referred me told me. You're lying. I haven't told anyone. Not even my father knows. A drop of cold sweat trickled down my back. Then I must have misremembered. Mr. Calvin, my reasoning was simple. A marriage license has your social security number on it. With your resources, finding someone with an SSN wouldn't be this difficult. So I guessed you probably weren't legally married. I lifted my head and met Calvin's gaze calmly. Was I right? Calvin smiled. You're very smart. But he wasn't about to let me off the hook. He moved closer, step by step. Finally, he trapped me in the corner between the desk and the wall. Since you're so smart, Dr. Lowe, let me tell you another secret. Calvin leaned down, as if trying to catch my scent. The first thing I did after I got my sight back was to look up my ex-wife's records in Seabrook. Guess what I found? I pretended to be curious. What was it? There's no record of Leah Lowe ever living in Seabrook. The records show there has never been anyone named Leah Lowe in that town. Not in the past, not now. Calvin said slowly. I gripped the corner of the desk, my knuckles white. My heart was pounding so fast it felt like it would burst out of my chest. How should I respond? Confusion? Shock? Or concern for my employer, who was on the verge of a breakdown over this news? Which was the right reaction? Before I could figure it out, my savior arrived. Serena burst through the door, fuming. What are you two doing? She had obviously gotten the wrong idea. The way Calvin was positioned, it looked like he was about to pin me against the wall. I took the chance to step back. It's not what you think. It's exactly what you think. Calvin and I spoke at the same time. I looked at him, shocked. What are you talking about? He was nonchalant, looking completely unbothered. Serena, my private life is none of your business. But we're about to get engaged. Calvin cut her off. We are never getting engaged. You're the great Serena Gong. Surely you can do better than a second-hand guy like me, right? He said it flippantly. But the more he acted like that, the more hurt Serena looked. Calvin was willing to call himself used goods just to make it clear he wasn't interested in her. I don't care about your past, Calvin. As long as you'll have me. I think you've got it wrong, Ms. Gong. The only reason I tolerate you is because you were the last person to see Lia. You said you had a way to find out where she is, so I let you come and go as you pleased. But what now? Where's the information? How long have you made me wait for nothing? Serena couldn't argue. So she turned on me. And what about her? Getting involved with her own patient is a clear violation of professional ethics. I'm going to have your father fire her, Calvin. Calvin stepped forward, shielding me. My private life is my business. And my therapist has nothing to do with you. His expression was cold, without a trace of their old connection. If you say one more word, I'll make sure your dream of marrying rich never comes true. Serena's face went white. Calvin had seen right through her. The Gong family was a paper tiger now, on the verge of bankruptcy. That's why her parents were so desperate for this marriage. Serena was desperate too. She'd never known poverty. Live in a 2-bedroom apartment? Eat pre-packaged meals? The thought was terrifying. She had to marry into a wealthy family before her own went under, to maintain her standard of living. Everyone said she was deeply in love with Calvin. Only she knew the truth. She was in love with the Hayes family's power and fortune. And it turned out, Calvin had seen through her all along. After that, Serena rarely came to Calvin's house. When we did run into each other, she'd give me a mocking look. As if I were the kind of woman who'd sleep with her boss just to climb the social ladder. She could think whatever she wanted. Over 2 months, I gradually got a handle on Calvin's new personality. Gloomy, irritable. But he was surprisingly nice to me. For example, when I said I wanted to learn to play golf, Calvin took me directly to the Hayes family's private course. And he taught me himself, with endless patience. Because of his behavior, the way the staff looked at me started to change. Anyone could see that Mr. Calvin was treating me as a stand-in. Even I started to suspect it. But Calvin immediately shot that down. A stand-in? That's ridiculous. I would never look for a stand-in. No one in this world could ever replace my wife. That kind of talk is disrespectful to you and to her. Then why are you so nice to me? We're just a boss and an employee. Because of your name, where you're from, all these little connections make me feel like fate is giving me hope, telling me not to give up looking for her. I was speechless. Actually, I've considered another possibility. Calvin said, his head lowered, his tone calm. What if she's not in this world anymore? Every time I think about that, I get terrified. Impossible, I blurted out. How can you be so sure? I had to force myself to explain, no news is good news. You have to keep your spirits up. Calvin smiled. It was the first time in all this time that I'd seen a genuine smile from him. But soon, he asked another question. Dr. Lowe, help me analyze this. If my wife is still alive, why won't she come find me? I looked away. I thought to myself. Because there's something important she still has to do. And the person she's been waiting for hasn't appeared yet. Maybe fate really was on my side. That very afternoon. On the golf course. I met the person I had been waiting for all this time. His name was Ethan Hayes. Ethan Hayes. I looked at the man in his late 30s, repeating his name over and over in my mind. Calvin called him Uncle. The man was dashing, handsome, and refined. Just like in the photos I had seen. Ethan walked over and greeted Calvin warmly. "Nephew, long time no see. Are your eyes better?" "Much better." Calvin stood before him, toning down some of his usual irritability. "And how have you been feeling otherwise?" "Everything's fine." "Did you like the gift I had sent over?" "I found it for you overseas." "I loved it." "Uncle, you always have the best taste. You know me best." The uncle and nephew seemed to have a good relationship. I'd heard that Calvin's father, the head of the entire family corporation, had never paid much attention to Calvin growing up. It was this uncle who had looked out for him. After a few words, Ethan finally noticed me. "And who is this?" "My therapist." "Oh, Dr. Lowe, a pleasure. I didn't expect you to be so beautiful in person." I immediately broke into a smile. "Mr. Hayes, I've always been a huge admirer of yours." "Oh? You admire me?" "I loved your books in college. I even collected the whole set." "Huh, so you're a fan of my work." Ethan cheerfully took out his phone. "Let's connect on a messaging app. I'll give you an autograph next time." "Thank you." Calvin was looking at me, completely baffled. He was probably wondering why I had suddenly changed my tune. I'd never been this enthusiastic with him. But I had no choice. I had to force a smile to stop myself from wanting to take Ethan down with me right then and there. After Ethan left, Calvin started grilling me. "You're a fan of my uncle's books?" "Yes." "How come you never mentioned it?" "It's not really something to talk about." "You didn't seem like a fan just now. You seemed more like you were trying to become my aunt." I didn't answer, instead asking him, "What's your uncle like as a person?" "Why are you asking? You don't actually have a thing for him, do you?" Seeing my silence, Calvin said, "I have to warn you. My uncle might look young, but he's 37. And while he's not married, he's had plenty of girlfriends. A guy his age, rich and single, is always the trickiest. He's your elder. You shouldn't talk about him like that. I'm only telling you this because I consider you a friend. Besides, do you know why he's a writer? Because he sucks at business. Even I'm better at running the company than he is." I let out a chuckle. Calvin's tone at that moment reminded me of the old days. We used to be like this, basking in the sun, joking around. So, almost instinctively, I blurted out, "Who could compare to you? You're so smart, you learned Braille in 2 months." The atmosphere suddenly froze. I instantly broke out in a cold sweat. "I mean, with Mr. Calvin's intelligence, you must, ah." Calvin grabbed my wrist, his grip incredibly strong. He was trembling. His body and his voice were both shaking. "How did you know that?" I wasn't sure if Calvin believed me. My explanation was, "I used hypnotherapy on you, remember? You told me during that session." "I said that?" "You did." I nodded firmly. "You were in a deep state of hypnosis. It's normal to forget a lot of the details after you wake up." Calvin couldn't find any holes in my lie. But when he drove me home, he stared at my back for a long, long time. For the next few days, I reported to his house as usual. Everything was normal. He didn't bring up his suspicions from that day again. It was as if it had all been a dream. Just when I thought Calvin's suspicions about me had faded, an unexpected guest arrived at the villa. The man was older, his face tanned dark by the sun. Calvin invited him into the tea room, and they talked about something. The tea room door was ajar. Their voices drifted out occasionally. I casually asked the housekeeper, "Who's that?" "I hear he's from Seabrook." "What?" "He contacted Mr. Calvin earlier, said he had news about his wife, so Mr. Calvin had someone bring him over." As she spoke, I had already walked to the tea room door. Hearing this, I immediately turned to leave. But it was too late. Their conversation reached my ears. Calvin asked, "Are you sure my wife is in this city now?" Yeah, took me a long time to find that out. Before he finished, the man's eyes suddenly widened. He pointed at me in the doorway and said loudly, "Wait, haven't you already found her?" My first instinct was to deny it. "You've got the wrong person. That's not me." "Hey, young lady, you might not remember me, but I remember you. You used to come to my store to buy vegetables all the time. You said your husband loved okra, so you always bought okra." Calvin loved okra now, too. I didn't dare look at him. "Sir, I just have a common face." "You're really mistaken." "I wouldn't make a mistake. You were an outsider, so you made a pretty deep impression on me." I opened my mouth, but realized it was hopeless. Truly hopeless. Any more denials would just seem deliberate. Though it was already pretty deliberate. Calvin looked calm. But his hands, resting on his knees, were trembling slightly from the force of his grip. He took a deep breath and said to the man, "Thank you for the information. You can go find my assistant for your payment." The man left, beaming. He even closed the door behind him. The atmosphere in the tea room was frozen. Finally, Calvin was the one to speak first. "Should I praise you for hiding so well, or praise myself for my intuition being right all along?" I mumbled, "Let's praise you." Calvin was so angry he laughed. He was laughing, but his eyes were turning red. "Don't you have anything to explain?" I had my reasons. But that answer clearly didn't satisfy him. Calvin suddenly pulled me and pushed me onto the small sofa in the tea room. He tore off my jacket, a button from my blouse popping off and flying away. But he didn't go any further. I knew him well. He would never do anything without my permission. This was all just a show of force. Calvin hung his head, and a moment later, my shoulder felt wet. His voice choked with tears as he asked, "Why? Why wouldn't you admit it was you? Am I that terrible?" "It's not your fault." I told him part of the story. About Serena's lies. "I thought you had a fiancé. Of course I couldn't come find you. But you know it was a misunderstanding now. Why do you still refuse to admit who you are?" Because we're too different." "What difference?" "You're the high and mighty Mr. Calvin, the heir to a major corporation. But I have no family and no money. It would be too hard for us to be together. Did you just forget about the 6 months we spent by the sea?" Calvin was genuinely frustrated. He held my jaw tightly, demanding, "Weren't we happy for those 6 months? I'll eat anything, I'm easy to take care of." This "too different" excuse is total bullshit. You don't have money, so I'll give you money. You don't have a family, so what am I? A dog you picked up? His questions were like a punch to the gut. I couldn't answer. All I could do was touch his face and, just like I used to, give him a gentle kiss. I was wrong. "I'm sorry. Can you forgive me?" Calvin's breath hitched. A moment later, he mumbled, "Fine." The entanglement in the tea room was, in the end, unavoidable. I initiated it. Mainly because I felt guilty. I had still lied to Calvin. I hooked my arms around his neck, unbuttoning his shirt, then his pants. Just like before. When he was blind, he'd always fumble in the wrong places. I would help him out of his restraints. Calvin had wanted me for 3 years. I could feel a pent-up madness in him. But I didn't tell him to stop. As a way of making it up to him, I was completely compliant, letting him unleash everything. Calvin knew my body like the back of his hand. Though he was fierce and wild, every touch was precise and perfect. Sometime during it all, it started to rain outside. I watched the streaks of water on the window, forming lines like a musical staff as the house shook. The string inside me snapped along with it. By the time we finished, it was already dark. Calvin held me, completely satisfied. "We're getting that marriage license tomorrow. Let's wait a little longer." "For what?" "Ethan invited me to a party at his house tomorrow." Calvin shot up, his face turning incredibly dark. You don't actually like him, do you? No, I'm just going to get his autograph. I guiltily looked away. But I didn't expect that simple gesture to be so completely misinterpreted by Calvin. I stayed in his room that night, and we were wild until midnight. But I underestimated this dark, obsessive man. When I woke up the next day, the bedroom door was locked from the outside. Calvin had left me a long letter before he went to the office. It was even handwritten, to show his sincerity. The gist was that he didn't want to restrict my freedom. But going to see Ethan was absolutely out of the question. He had waited 3 years for me to come back, and he couldn't bear the risk of losing me. After reading it, I could only manage a bitter smile. Calvin had really gotten it all wrong. I wasn't going to date Ethan. I was going to kill him. I had indeed hidden a lot from Calvin. For example, I wasn't from Seabrook. My real hometown was a remote place in the middle of nowhere. My family was poor, and when I finished middle school, they couldn't afford to send me to high school. I also thought I was mediocre, so I just drifted through my days. That's when I met Clara. She was a young teacher who had come to volunteer, like in Teach for America. I got used to calling her my big sister. She would snatch cigarettes out of my hand and cook me hot noodle soup. She tirelessly told me, "Girls need to study hard. You can't give up on yourself." Clara scrimped and saved to pay my tuition so I could continue my education. Later, when her term was over, she left. But she continued to support my studies from afar. My first real understanding of the world came from Clara's descriptions. She told me about mountains and rivers, about the stars and the universe. But what I longed for most was the ocean. Because Clara was born by the sea. In that place called Seabrook. I swore that when I grew up, I would go see it for myself. Later, I got into a good university. Clara sent me a key. She said, "I left Seabrook after middle school, but my family's old house is still there. You're all grown up now. In the future, when you're feeling down, go feel the sea breeze. Treat it like your own home. Stay as long as you like." I kept that key, but never had the chance to go. About 4 years ago, Clara messaged me. "I'm in a relationship. I think I've really met the one this time." She sent me a photo of them together. In the picture, Ethan Hayes was dapper and refined. He's my favorite author. We met at a book club event. He's so good to me. Shoo, he's a public figure, so we have to keep it a secret. It was clear she was deeply in love. Not long after, Ethan proposed to her. Everything was so perfect, so beautiful. That's why I never could have imagined that the next time I heard news of Clara Chue, it would be about her death. Half a month after Clara disappeared, her body was pulled from a river. The coroner ruled it a suicide by drowning. In that moment, the world spun around me. Why? A person so full of hope, ready to start a new life. Why would she kill herself? I couldn't understand. The sharp pain in my heart made it impossible to think. Clara once said that when you're sad, you should go feel the sea breeze. I took the key and set off for Seabrook. I stayed there for a week, trying to cope with the grief alone. Just as I was preparing to leave, Calvin showed up. He was soaked to the bone, his face pale. He was waiting to die. In that instant, blood rushed to my head. Was it like this for Clara when she drowned? I threw myself at him like a madwoman. I had to save him. Calvin was lucky. After passing out from exhaustion, the waves washed him onto the sand, and I found him quickly enough to save his life. Later, as we spent day after day together, I fell in love with Calvin. His determination to learn Braille, his refusal to give up on himself, reminded me so much of what Clara had taught me. I thought, Clara was right. When you're sad, go feel the sea breeze. The ocean will bring new hope. But I never imagined back then that just 6 months later, I would see Ethan Hayes in person. It was the day Serena came to find me. She wasn't alone. Ethan was with her. After Serena said her piece, I packed my things to leave. But I ran into Ethan at the crossroads. I recognized him instantly. He had a distinguished air, just like in the photos. He was on the phone and didn't notice me pass by. That house was a dump. I didn't go in, didn't want to get my shoes dirty. I let Serena go in by herself. Speaking of which, this Seabrook place, why does it sound so familiar? Oh. Clara? I'd almost forgotten about her if you hadn't brought her up. Ethan's face twisted into a grotesque smile. That girl was so fresh. I spent half a year painstakingly winning her over, even pulled out the whole proposal routine, all so I could play some rougher games with her later. It's a shame, though. We just added a few more people, and she just had to go and die on us. I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ethan continued, "Don't worry, no one will ever find out. I took care of things, the coroner is one of ours." In that moment, the question that had tormented me for so long was finally answered. Clara didn't commit suicide. Her body was dumped. I was determined to get revenge for Clara. But I had no proof, and Ethan's power was like a mountain crushing down on me. If he could get to the coroner, he had likely covered all the other bases as well. What could I do? I realized. To slay the dragon, I had to wield the sword myself. Even if the price was mutual destruction. I started working out. Every day, I practiced how to swing a fruit knife to pierce a heart. I also changed my name. I was worried Clara had mentioned me to Ethan, and using my real name would be a problem. Later, I found a way to change my official address to Seabrook. At least on paper, I was no longer Lialo from that small northern village. But I could never find an opportunity to get close to him. I had snuck into book club meetings. But perhaps because he'd killed someone, Ethan had stopped hunting among his fans. He had become more cautious. Actually, I was well aware of his relationship with Calvin. But I never wanted to use Calvin. The man I loved deserved to be clean, far away from my plans. Until a few months ago. A female friend recommended this job to me. She said, "It pays really well." That doesn't interest me. The hours are flexible. I'm pretty free now anyway. She suddenly lowered her voice. The client is connected to the person you care about. I'll take it. When do I start? When we parted ways that day, my friend called out to me, "Lily, this is as far as I can help you. You have to walk the rest of the way yourself." I know. Thank you. If the police ever find you, just swear you don't know me well. Her eyes red, she hugged me. I hope you succeed. And I hope Clara can finally rest in peace. At that time, I never imagined that after all the twists and turns, the connection I finally made would be through Calvin. Ethan always had bodyguards. The best way to get close to him was to become his next prey. Ethan didn't host book club meetings anymore. But that didn't mean he'd lost interest in his female fans. So on the golf course that day, I pretended to be infatuated with him. From that day on, I messaged him daily, pouring out my fervent admiration. Sure enough, Ethan couldn't wait and invited me to one of his private parties. Calvin had only locked the door. But there were still windows. After 3 years of consistent workouts, climbing out a window was nothing to me. I slipped out through a side door of the villa and headed straight for Ethan's residence. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I saw what was happening inside. A man asked, "Mr. Hayes, where's the main course you promised? Why isn't she here yet?" "Soon." Ethan glanced at his watch. Then he typed a message on his phone. He was probably rushing me, but Calvin had confiscated my phone. "I promise, she's fresh and delicious," Ethan smiled at the men. "With my years of experience with women, this one is even more exciting than the others." I hope she doesn't disappoint. It seemed Clara wasn't the only one to have met this fate. I gripped the fruit knife I had prepared and was about to push the door open. However, in that very instant, A large, warm, dry hand closed over the fist I was clenching around the knife. "It's not worth getting your hands dirty for someone like him," Calvin said in a low voice. My plan was interrupted. Calvin scooped me up by the waist and stuffed me into his car. "Let me go in. This is the chance I've been waiting for." "I'm sorry, I can't stand by and watch you become a criminal." "You know everything?" Calvin nodded. "I'm not going to assume you brought a knife to cut fruit for them. But you don't know the whole story, you don't understand my pain. Just get out of my way and pretend you never saw me today." "I already know." "What?" Calvin pulled a letter from his pocket. My eyes went wide. It was my confession letter. I had imagined that after avenging Clara, I might be beaten to death by bodyguards on the spot. Or I might be killed by Ethan in the struggle. If, by some stroke of luck, I survived, I would immediately turn myself in and accept my punishment. No matter what, it was a one-way road. This was the most important reason I didn't want to reveal my identity to Calvin. To find me, only to lose me again. It would be too cruel for him. The excuse about our different backgrounds was just a smokescreen. Calvin asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "He's your uncle." "So what if he's my uncle? Did you think I would side with him instead of you?" "You've misunderstood me completely. That's not what I meant." I sighed and took the initiative to hug Calvin, coaxing him. "I love you very much. That's why I didn't want to use you. I just want you to be okay." Calvin froze. "You love me?" "Yes. If I didn't love you, I would have dragged you into my plans a long time ago." Calvin was stunned for a few seconds, as if processing my words. I wasn't good at expressing affection and rarely said "I love you" to him before. After a moment, he said firmly, "That's all I need to hear. I will take care of him for you." Calvin had come prepared. He gave me a new lead. "The boating accident 3 years ago," he said. "My private yacht gets regular maintenance, but that day, it suddenly malfunctioned for no reason. I always thought it was an accident, until recently, when I discovered that Ethan had been on my yacht the day before it happened." "Do you have concrete evidence?" "We're recovering the security footage data. It's been a long time, so it's difficult." "Your uncle seems so nice to you. Why would he do something like that?" Calvin sneered. "He cares about me because I'm the heir, but that doesn't mean he doesn't covet the position." "So when you were greeting and chatting with him on the golf course, that was all an act?" "Yes. I won't let him see my hand until I have the evidence." A thought suddenly flashed in my mind. "You have a lot of connections and informants. You should be able to find out other things, right? What do you want me to look into?" "Clara's real cause of death. Her body was cremated. We'll have to approach it from another angle." "Right. For example, where was the crime scene, and what are the visitor logs?" "And drugs," Calvin added. This was an angle I had never considered. "You think they might have been using illegal drugs?" "More than that. I suspect they were also drugging the female victims." "Yes." Clara was level-headed and smart. When she realized something was wrong, she would have found a way to escape. Unless she wasn't conscious. It was as if 1,000 tangled threads were slowly becoming clear before my eyes. Calvin and I began to investigate separately. He looked into the details of the yacht accident. I looked into the details of the day Clara's case was reported. Calvin assigned his assistant and bodyguards to me, in case Ethan got suspicious. Half a month later, the security footage and ship's logs were all recovered. The evidence was conclusive. Ethan had tampered with Calvin's yacht the day before the accident. But unfortunately, there was no progress on Clara's case at all. The truth about the yacht accident was out. Calvin was the first to confront Ethan. At a family gathering, Ethan was flustered by his questioning. Calvin's father, the chairman, looked at his younger brother in disbelief. Ethan was much younger than him, a child of their parents' old age. The whole family had doted on him. They never expected to have spoiled him into a ruthless monster. Ethan dropped to his knees at the chairman's feet. He tried to use tears to appeal to their brotherly bond. I just had a moment of weakness, I just wanted a few more shares. Brother, please forgive me, I swear I'll never do it again. The chairman's face was grim. He said nothing. Serena's family was also there today. Originally, it was to make it clear that the marriage alliance between the two families was off. They never expected to be so humiliated. I sat at a corner of the dining table, coldly observing everyone's expressions. Ethan was guilty and fawning, the chairman was furious at his failure, Serena's father was indifferent, and Serena. Something's not right. Serena appeared calm, but she was constantly drinking water and fixing her hair. In psychology, these are signs of guilt. So I deliberately spoke up. Oh, that reminds me of something. Serena snapped, is it your place to speak? I heard you and Calvin never even got a marriage license. Do you really think you're the Hayes family's daughter-in-law? I smiled and threw the words Calvin had once used to rebut me back at her. How did you know we didn't get a license? Were you also nearby when the yacht had its accident? Serena's face instantly went pale. And no, don't talk nonsense. Don't be nervous. What I was going to say was, the day you came to find me in Seabrook, why was Ethan with you? He's Calvin's uncle, of course he would go. I stopped talking and just stared at her. This was another psychological tactic. When faced with a guilty person, staring at them will eventually make them crack. Sure enough, the silence made Serena even more frantic. She blurted out, Ethan insisted on coming with me. It had nothing to do with me. You're lying. Ethan suddenly shouted. You bitch, do you dare tell the truth? You were the one who stole Calvin's ID. It was so that when his body was found, they couldn't immediately identify him. That's impossible. I'm crazy about Calvin, why would I do something like that? Because I promised you that if I got Calvin's shares, would give you a cut and let you marry into the Hayes family. But I never thought you'd be even more materialistic than I imagined. The moment you saw Calvin wasn't dead, you immediately started sucking up to him again. Serena was in a full-blown panic. You're lying. This is a man who would frame his own nephew, don't believe a word he says. But Serena had underestimated Ethan's cunning. He had actually kept a recording of their conversation when they were plotting together. After the recording played, Serena's father furiously asked his daughter, didn't you say you were in love with Calvin? But he doesn't love me. I had to find another way. Her father slapped her across the face. Not satisfied, he slapped the other side. I really wasted my life raising a useless thing like you. The scene was chaos. Calvin and I, on the other hand, had become outsiders. Calvin cut a piece of steak for me. Eat more. Don't go hungry. I looked down at my plate, holding back the urge to cry. What Ethan had said just now made me even more certain that Clara's body had been dumped by him. Because when Clara was pulled from the river, there was nothing on her that could prove her identity either. The answer was right in front of me. But I couldn't find any concrete evidence. Ethan had covered his tracks too well. I was devastated. However, fate is fair. Not long after, evidence suddenly showed up at my door. To be precise, they weren't evidence. They were people. They were the other victims Ethan had preyed on. I always knew that looking for clues among Ethan's fans would be faster. But I didn't do it. The victims were in hiding for a reason. They didn't want to relive those memories. Getting justice for Clara was important. But protecting the other victims was just as important. I never imagined they would come forward on their own. The women told me they wanted to post online to expose Ethan's actions and prevent more women from being deceived. After much thought, I decided to compile the evidence and post it for them. That way, it would be harder for them to be identified. At the same time, Calvin spent a fortune hiring multiple teams of bodyguards. They guarded the homes of these victims day and night to prevent Ethan from retaliating. Once the post was published, it caused a massive uproar. Under public pressure, the authorities had no choice but to reopen the investigation. Ethan tried to flee the country. Calvin used the same trick, having someone steal his passport so he couldn't go anywhere. The chairman was utterly disappointed in his brother. The Hayes family was also facing an unprecedented crisis of reputation. The chairman had to step forward, apologize on his brother's behalf, and express his willingness to cooperate with the police to bring the culprit to justice. After this crisis, the chairman's hair turned mostly white. He finally felt that he couldn't handle it anymore. So, against all opposition, he handed over the position of chairman to Calvin. With great power in his hands, Calvin didn't favor his own uncle. Instead, he pushed the authorities to speed up the investigation. In the end, Ethan was arrested by the police on suspicion of multiple crimes. Each crime he committed was enough to warrant the death penalty. The day he was arrested, snow began to fall from the sky. Quietly, it blanketed the earth in white. After the last elderly resident of Seabrook moved to the city, Calvin bought the land and prepared to redevelop it. A few days before construction began, we went to Clara's house together. The old house was dilapidated. The walls were mottled from the dampness. The salty smell of the sea hung in the air. But this was the place that held so many of our memories. I sorted through Clara's things one last time. It was like a silent farewell. Calvin bought a watermelon, and after we ate it, we both collapsed onto that bed. The sea breeze blew in through the window. It softened our hearts. I said softly, "Thank you." For what?" Calvin asked. "Thank you for stopping me, for not letting me become a murderer." "Then I should thank you too." "For what?" "Thank you for finding me on the beach, for saving me, for learning Braille with me, for encouraging me to live. Thank you for appearing in my life." We looked at each other and smiled, then shared a long, knowing kiss. The seashell wind chime in the window tinkled in the breeze. It turned out that it wasn't just the sea that was gentle. It was also the person you watch it with. "Clara, look. In the end, I didn't let you down."